Hello everyone, welcome to World Literature. In this subject, particularly in this topic, we will be discussing about the basic principles and everything you need to know to understand what literature is before we delve into the different literary pieces coming from the other countries. To start with, let us define what literature is. So it says here, it is a body of work either written, oral, or visual containing imaginative language that realistically portrays thoughts, emotions, and experiences of human condition. So the major question here is that why is there a need to study literature? So to answer that question, it says here that we learn the culture of people across time and space. Not only the traditions and culture that we have here in the Philippines, but also those that are coming from the different countries. So in literature, it is divided into two main divisions, namely the prose and then the poetry. To have a clear understanding between the two, here is a diagram that shows the differences between the two. So poetry and prose has differences in terms of form, language, appeal, and aim. So for poetry, it is written in verse form, while in prose, it is written in paragraph. In terms of language, poetry uses figurative language, while prose uses based on normal language words. In terms of appeal, poetry uses feelings and emotions, and for prose, it uses the mental and intellect of a person. Lastly, we have the aim. So for poetry, it is to stir one's mind, while on prose, it is to give information. So those are just the basic differences between the two. So I have also included the elements of plot, which is very essential in understanding the literary text that we will be discussing in the future. So first one we have the exposition. This is where the characters are being introduced, followed by the rising action. This will lead us to the events leading to the climax. So for the climax, it is the turning point of the story, and this is where the most exciting part of the story transpire. Down to the falling action, this is where the problem has been resolved. And then for the Noma, this is where the story comes to an end. Okay, so let us now go into the deeper side of literature, particularly world literature. So how do we define world literature? So world literature is the totality of all national literatures. It also refers to the circulation of works into the wider world beyond their country of origin. It is a category of literary production, publication, and circulation that has legs. This means that it is a work of literature that is a touchstone of local culture, or, in other words, it becomes a standard for a local culture. It then becomes an influence on a regional culture and later a part of the fabric of global community. It moves from local to regional to global. So there are four regions of world literature. We have African literature, American, European or British literature, and finally, Asian literature. So for the history of world literature, there is an important person that we need to talk about in terms of the history of world literature. So the term world literature was first used by the German writer and statesman Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, referring to the dissemination of literature from and to countries across the globe. He used the word world literature in 1827. So Goethe studied the characteristic features and interrelationships of different national literatures, the tendencies of their development, and their achievements. He studied the works of famous writers, which presented different literary phenomena of different historic periods. Additionally, Goethe famously stated in letters to Johann Eckermann in the year 1827, quote unquote, I am more and more convinced that poetry is the universal possession of mankind, revealing itself everywhere and at all times in hundreds and hundreds of men. I, therefore, like to look about me in foreign nations and advise everyone to do the same. National literature is now a rather unmeaning term. The epoch of world literature is at hand, and everyone must strive to hasten its approach. So, based on what I have said earlier, one of the importance of world literature is that we are able to understand the culture and tradition a place has. So, in addition to that, world literature is the cultural heritage of all humanity. It is essential to study world literature as it helps us to understand the life of different people from all over the world, forms our world outlook, and acquaints us with the masterpieces of literature. So, for the basic concepts of world literature, number one, world literature as a comprehensive corpus of all literary texts in all languages of the world. It is probably the easiest to grasp. World literature is simply all of the world's literature. On the other hand, it is the most unwieldy to work with in practice. Number two, world literature as anthropological comparison of how different cultures develop literary forms. It should be thought of in opposition to number four. Later, I will be showing you what number four is, rather than thinking about how literary forms or ideas move from one culture to another. We instead look at cultures that have no contact, but notice that each has developed myths or each has developed lyric poetry and etc. In actual fact, there are literary forms such as myth and lyric that seem to be universal, whereas others such as the novel or tragedy seem to have developed in specific regions and been introduced elsewhere through processes of globalization. Number three, world literature as a hypercanon of the best that has been thought and said by selected writers of the world. A canon is a group of approved or highly regarded must-read texts. Any literary anthology, since it obviously must make selections, posits its own canon, but the idea of canon invoked in number three is more that of a national literary canon. Those texts that have proven enduring and have continued to live in the culture. The hypercanon in number three indicates that world literature is composed of a canon of the best various national canons, which is the best of the best. Finally, number 4, world literature as the process of diffusion of texts around the globe through translation, adaptation, rewriting, and etc. It focuses on the fact that when literary forms or works travel from one part of the globe to another, they are inevitably changed, and they also alter the receiving culture's literary canon. World literature is the process of continual travel, rewriting, and mediation of literary texts across cultural boundaries.